Welcome, everyone, to We Are Resilient Practical Skills for Managing Challenging Workplace Relationships. I'm so happy that you're here with us today. And this is a webinar, so we are recording it for future purposes to send it out to you afterwards. And we will also be sending the deck. So I know that's a very common question. Our materials we're happy to share with people. And I'm doing... before we go any further, I just want to appreciate you. That's one of our skills we'll be talking about today. I just want to thank you for being you, for handling all the challenges that come up in your life, for taking care of the people around you, and for caring. It matters a lot. Before any further, I'll introduce myself. Mary McCoy Thompson. I'm COO of Dovetail Learning. I have 2 adult children and 2 aging parents, so I'm caring for different people at different stages of life. I spent my career in nonprofits and education and healthcare, working around the world. I've lived and worked on 4 continents. And my goal is really to help others to empower their best life. And I'm thrilled to be teaching about We Are Resilient because I really think it can have profound effects both for us personally and for all those around us. And with that, I'll pass it off to my fellow coach, Christy.
Thanks, Mary. I'm super excited to be here. My name is Christy Kennedy. I've been with Dovetail Learning for 6 years, co-author, as is Mary, of our We Are Resilient approach. We have all created this as a generative process together. I am the mom of 2 young gentlemen, 13 and 16. We just toured colleges. I can't believe the transitions we're about to enter into, and happy that we have the resilient approaches we do to move through them. Also the pet mom of a little boxer pup that we got during the pandemic, like so many, and also our 2 fur babies, Cuomo and Pippin the cats. So excited to be here, super excited to be moving through this with you. A little bit about Dovetail. Our mission is strengthening resilience in adults and children. And ideally, our vision is moving towards and contributing to a world of connected and kind human beings. And we really, truly believe we can do that through our We Are Resilient approach, which is also offered as an open education resource. What does that mean? That means you can go to our website, you can download anything. We just ask that if you adapt it or change anything, you share it back to us so we can share it back out to the world and to give us the appropriate attribution to that work. So please visit our website and access that open education resource. So moving into what we're talking about today is, what challenges do we face in our workplace relationships? So go ahead in the chat. What are some things that you are experiencing as you are moving through the world of your workplace? Sometimes micromanagement of our bosses. Sometimes our people we're supervising, don't get work done very effectively. So what brought you here today? Just feel free to chat into that little chat box. Things that have been coming up for you. That's a great one, Mary. Sadness when our colleagues move on. We have those great relationships. Interpersonal communication obstacles. Well, we're going to be talking a little bit about that with our collaborating skills. Anyone else? I know myself, Mary, Mary has been a great mentor of mine, I have to say, when it comes to supervising negative coworkers. Yes. What does that look like and why? And having some of that different demographics that we're working with. Absolutely.
It's so helpful when you guys share the particulars of your conflicts because it just gives us an idea. Yeah, no trauma-informed policies. Absolutely. It's really hard when we're like really trying to lean into being trauma-informed and the people around us are not understanding the approach. And then there's the coworkers with trauma. Yeah, they respond to 11 in a situation that's 2. Absolutely.
I think, Mary, after this, let's make sure to send out that Anne's video that we shared during some of our training. I think that could be really helpful. 8 minutes of explaining what is happening at that nervous system level. Let's just add that to the list if we want to do that. I think it's helpful. Thank you so much for sharing, everyone, because again, it really helps us understand what you're experiencing. Feel free as we move through our agenda. Bad communication. Oh, that's number 1. We're going to talk about that. Absolutely, Samantha. So what I'd like us to do, we're going to talk about our agenda today, or our topics, as I like to say. We're going to talk about how does resilience help in our challenging workplace relationships. We'll give you a super brief intro overview of the We Are Resilient approach. This is our 30-minute webinar, intro to everything. We're going to talk about what gets in the way of our resilience, what we call protective patterns, and then what resilience skills can help us. And we're going to really focus on our collaborating skills. And just to let you know, we have other webinar series that we will be offering that talk about connecting skills and various other ways in which we connect with others. But we're just going to do that brief overview today. Thank you, everyone.
So Chrissy talked about, the things that we're going to be talking about. We're starting out with what is resilience, because it's like, I came here to talk about challenging relationships. What does that have to do with resilience? That's the first question, right? And just so we're all on the same page, resilience is the ability to adapt and respond to meet challenges effectively. Our resilience will be higher or lower in different situations. And our resilience can be strengthened through the practice of specific skills. That is the good news. So in terms of resilience and workplace challenges, part of the issue, we really have the philosophy that all of this has to start with us. So we have things that are happening around us in the workplace, and we can feel like, oh, if they only do X, my life would be perfect. The reality is life requires us to step up our resilience. And the more that we can respond to the challenges that are thrust upon us, the more we can help create the world that we need and the workplaces that we need. And so by being an ability to increasing our ability to adapt and respond to everything that's brought to us, we can make the workplace better for ourselves. Knowing that it's never going to be perfect, we can be in this perfect place, everything's going along, we've got everything, and our boss can come in, we can meet one of those red tapes that Anna was talking about, we can have bad communications, or the coworker with trauma history that Kathleen was talking about, and we can be totally thrown off. And part of our approach through We Are Resilient is to understand what is our role in that, how can we make a difference, and then therefore how can we help and see others in our environment differently. So also to understand that resilience is not an ordinary superpower, is an ordinary superpower. It does not come from rare and special qualities, but from the everyday magic of being human. So I just want to acknowledge that all of us already are resilient. That is the good news. We are resilient. And the work of We Are Resilient approach is just to help strengthen us, and so that we can be even more resilient. Also, we distinguish these 5 different types of resilience. We're not going to be talking about all of this today. There's a lot more in the We Are Resilient approach that, as Chrissy said, you can get through our materials we download. We have free circles that you can join. We have lots of free webinars you can join, or you can have custom trainings to learn more about it. All of these interact together. In 30 minutes, all we can do is just give you a taste of what We Are Resilient can do and how it can change your life. And part of that is helping you have better, more effective communication and better relationships, help you live more authentically. And that's what we want to do both in our personal and our professional life in those workplace challenges. The other thing I want to say is one of the keys to improving our workplace is connection. We work better together when we're connected with each other. We bring our whole selves into the workplace, just like our whole selves are elsewhere in the world. Sometimes we pretend, and our workplaces pretend, that we're just little machines that get our work done. The reality, the more that we can connect, the more that we can create strong relational practices in our workplace, the better our workplace will be for us, and the better those challenging relationships will be. And we know that we are hardwired for connection, right? And that is why connection is one of the keys here. Through life and at work, we are strengthened by being present to each other's stories with transparency and vulnerability. We normalize and humanize each other by being ourselves with each other. We can be companions on the journey. This is a long way to say that even if you're a manager, you can create relational practices, you can model relational practices, you can set up relational practices for your staff and the people you work with. And if you're not, you can still do it with the people you work with. You might not be able to change the entire culture, but you can start on building relational practices with the people that you're with, the people that are next to you, all of your colleagues that you have an impact on. Okay.
Thanks, Mary. And that moves us into the, what are we here for today? Practical skills for managing stress, strengthening relationships, and communicating more effectively. And one thing I want to mention that Mary just touched on is, I don't know about anyone on this call, but there are certain people in the workplace settings that when I am upset or having a hard time, I can go to and they can help me co-regulate down to bring me to my center. They can help relate my relational resilience with them. And we'll talk about that a little bit, what that looks like. But there's also the people on the team that if you go to when you are up and you are kind of upset or on one or something's not working for you, that kind of make it bigger. And it's so important to acknowledge that how we co-regulate those connecting relationships directly impact us. But we'll talk a little bit about what the We Are Resilient approach looks like and means. So a couple of things that we've done with the We Are Resilient approach is like Mary mentioned, we've broken this out. Resilience isn't just about that personal resilience that most people identify it, but it has to do with 5 different specific types. Our cultural resilience, that's an entirely, I wouldn't even say a webinar, that is a 2-week training at some point in time, or a 6-hour training or a 3-hour training, a little bit more blown out. But basically how we view and interact with the world. And then we have our reactive resilience, which we'll scratch the surface of a little bit today to give you some perspective for those colleagues of yours. But that's how we react to the world, and it comes from a need for safety. We have our personal resilience, as many people define resilience. And as we say at Dovetail, this level of our skills and these types of resilience is how we create the world we want most to be in. And then we have relational resilience, that ebb and the flow that we have with each individual person when it comes to how we connect and how our relationship works or does not work in certain settings. And then our group resilience is what we're going to focus on today. A couple of those skills, a few of those skills, to talk about how to increase that workplace relationships. But before we dive into that, we have our mindsets. And I know this is a lot to cover in a short amount of time. Please sign up for more webinars. But we have first mindset that we've identified as curiosity. And I'm asking you to be curious. We actually at times say, put on these mindsets like hats. Like, let's be curious together. Let's wonder together. Let's just be open, non-conclusive as we move through this work together. Our second mindset that supports our resilience is choice. Voice and choice and agency when we're talking about the workplace. It's so important. If you're in a supervisor role, having choice for those you are supervising allows them agency. Let's keep that in mind as we're thinking about our collaborating skills together. And the next one that we have is courage. The courage to actually engage with these relational resilience, to engage with the group resilience, and to make the connections that Mary was talking about. And again, we have entire webinars just on the resilient mindsets, but that gives you a little taste of what we're working with. So our next piece is that we want you to acknowledge that you are the beginning point. Your self-care to navigate your own stressors. Not only are you taking care of you, but you're modeling for your staff, you're modeling for your colleagues how this works. And the next piece is your team care. Responding with kindness through strength-based relational practices is really important for a strong team. And finally, then we have your family and friends and outside your household in which you can take these strategies too. And this comes down to the foundational framework of our work. We are resilient. If we can advance that, Mary, to the practice. There we go. So we want to talk about the resilient approach to this framework idea, which is our practice for myself to become proficient, to become better. Micro habits are key, as we like to say, and we'll talk about those. We then model for others. So when I take care of my own resilient needs, I am modeling that for the team around me. As a mother, I'm modeling that for my children, which allows me then to coach or mentor using curiosity, compassionate questions, and encouragement. That is the baseline framework for the We Are Resilient approach. And that moves us right into, Mary, what can get in the way of our resilience?
Well, the big thing to understand when we're looking at what can get in the way of resilience is, first of all, stress has 3 different types of stress. So we have positive stress, and this can be a brief stress. This can be public speaking, maybe my projects due, and we get stressed about it. We can
prepping for a webinar, Mary? Prepping for a webinar in there.
Exactly. Or any project that's due. You probably have these kinds of stress events. You could have them 5 times a day. You can have them 20 times a day, but they come and they go, and they actually can get us so we're in a better place because we're stronger. We've had this positive stress. There's tolerable stress that's time limited. And there might be a personal loss. Maybe something doesn't go well. Maybe we've applied for a big grant and it didn't come through. We need a buffering relationship. That's when one of our colleagues can really help us with their buffering, just by being a friend, by being companions, or we can help others. Then we have this toxic stress, extreme, frequent, or extended. That's abuse, neglect, and discrimination. That's when you really need healing and regeneration. We are resilience not really meant to heal that real toxic stress for people. It can be an aid. We're really looking at the tolerable stress and how can we make that better, right? And so we want to acknowledge, first of all, that there will be relationships and there will be workplaces that we are resilient and the approach is not going to be able to fix. Sometimes leaving is the only appropriate response. Both Chrissy and I have had that experience where we've been with situations with people that were too toxic, and with all the best intentions in the world and a lot of work on relational practices, we just could not make that work. So I want to acknowledge that first of all, that you might be in a situation that We Are Resilient is not going to be able to help. And then you have to be looking at other options for yourself in order to avoid that.
Mary, what you said that's so important is that prevention versus intervention. So a lot of the work that we do is in that preventative model. It can buffer and alleviate some of the processes and the stress that's happening in that intervention stage. But that toxic stress that Mary is talking about is when you really need an intervention, and whether that is an actual change of what you were doing or someone else to come in to help mediate at a higher professional level. And it just to acknowledge the difference between prevention and intervention and maintenance almost.
Excellent. Yeah. So how does this happen? Well, we can be going along. Let's say we're just working along today and then something happens. We get that phone call, we get that email from a colleague or express. Maybe somebody comes in and unloads their stuff on us and we just lose our cool. This is when what we called our protective patterns might emerge, and we hit a peak. We feel awful. Oh, it takes such a long time to calm down. We're so mad at A, B, or C, whatever. And we just feel really depleted. We have too many of these in a day, and it's just you're starting to hate your work and you hate life when you have a lot of red zones. And so part of our goal is how can we move out of this red zone and manage the stress curve so we can keep our cool, right? So that's when somebody else comes in and we notice, wow, that's a protective pattern. That's either their protective pattern, my protective pattern. We wonder and assess, is that helpful? Think about protective patterns, and we'll talk about this in a minute. They can be helpful or harmful. And if they're harmful, what kind of resilience skills can I choose instead so I can calm down and feel centered and I don't have to go into the red zone? The We Are Resilient approach is about helping us manage that stress curve, keeping ourselves in the green zone or maybe all the way in the green zone, and just keeping our cool, keeping our relationships.
And also, just to name Mary, it also means that maybe we didn't go as far into the red zone.
That's
this
right.
is a human experience. I'm not perfect. I helped write this approach, and there's times I still enter the red zone. So I want to normalize and humanize that
Right.
just practicing these skills doesn't mean I will never enter the red zone again, because it's going to happen based on our life experiences. But to mitigate it, to bring it down a notch, is also still very successful.
Exactly. Great qualification. So let's talk about the protective patterns. We just saw that on the green curve. What are these protective patterns? They are how we react to the world. So often they have developed when we were children, and they're maybe part of our personality, part of our experiences, part of our family life. And these default patterns of reacting come out when we feel unsafe, when we're stressed. And we may feel emotionally unsafe, socially, physically, economically. Maybe we're in a power situation, so our boss comes in and they does something and we feel a little bit unsafe because they could fire us if they don't like what we're doing. Maybe it's a colleague who comes in or sends us an email about something and we don't really trust them, so we always feel unsafe. And in those situations, we can have our protective patterns. They can be helpful. They can get us to where we need to go, but they often don't let us grow and thrive. And so in each situation, we need to be curious. Christy had talked about that curiosity mindset. Is this helpful? And then notice and wonder whether it's not, and maybe what other options we can do. So let's talk a little bit more about what those protective patterns are. So we have 6 protective patterns that we've outlined. Distrusting. Now, distrusting is when we don't know, we're wary of other people. and we're not sure, what they're going to do, or maybe we're wary of ourselves. We don't trust ourselves. We didn't get that project done right. What kind of mistakes did I make? I'm going to get in trouble because I haven't done A, B, or C. So we distrust the world around us, right? Hypervigilance is another protective pattern. Hypervigilance is we're always on alert. Oh my gosh, everything I do, it's going to be wrong. Or if I don't look around all the time, I'm going to be in trouble. We were certainly hypervigilant at the beginning of COVID. It's a perfect example. We're like trying to assess all the time. And we know that harm from hypervigilance, we feel really worn out. Hyper caretaking, we're always doing everything to take care of other people and not ourselves. We know that some professions, like the teaching profession and healthcare, there's a lot of hyper caretakers in that. But I would say half my family is hyper caretakers. So hyper caretaking can emerge in other things. Christy, you want to talk about the other three?
Absolutely. And then the next ones that we have are, and again, I want to also acknowledge that these are the 6 most common that we've identified. Some people find themselves, some people feel that they need to relabel it. That's okay. It's about labeling your protective pattern so you can be in relationship with it. Avoiding, we all have been in the workplace situation where someone does something that they shouldn't have done and they just disappear. Like, they're off the group chats, they're off of your Google chats or whatever platform you use, Teams. They're not responding to an email, and then it kind of builds up. We have our defending. I am standing on this hill and I am not moving. It doesn't matter if I'm wrong. Everything you say to them sounds like you're questioning, and they get defensive. I have to be right. I must be right. And then one thing we didn't mention, I like to share, this is my go-to. I'm attacking. Attacking is something that's my go-to protective pattern. And I say that because it can feel uncomfortable to identify with these, but these are everywhere. Your mother's, your friend down the street, your neighbor, the librarian, your children, everyone has protective patterns. So the idea about naming them is that we can be in relationship and not feel judgment or shame around them if we can create a relationship with it. And so we can talk about how that can present. What's your style, Mary?
My style is I tend to be an attacker, or I attack. And I think it's because I grew up with 2 older brothers and a family that like to yell. And so like somebody comes at me, I'm right there. I can go at it. I've done this in the workplace and I have had people look at me like, what? And I realize, wow, that's something. So I also avoid things come in and it's like, oh, I have a lot of emails in my email chain that I have not dealt with, that I'm supposed to deal with, and I didn't know what to, and so I just avoided. And one of my challenges is to overcome that protective pattern. When it's not helpful, my email box fills up with things that I'm supposed to deal with. So totally understand that we can move into avoiding, we can move into attacking, and it's uncomfortable, but it's the protective pattern that we use. So if you have any questions about got a raised hand. Excellent. Can you unmute yourself? Do I have to unmute you? Or you can put your questions in the chat, Q&A.
So I raised hand, then it went away. I don't know if it went away, but you could definitely chat us if you have any questions about protective patterns. And I want to name a couple that I've seen in the workplace. I've been a hyper caretaker in the workplace as a supervisor, where I jumped in on top of someone's work because I was trying to fix it for them. And in reality, I was actually not giving the person that was working under me the autonomy and the agency to feel good about the work they were doing. I thought I was doing helpfulness. And the attacking, as you talk about, Mary, I've had a boss who screamed and yelled every time I did something. And it became to the point I was nervous to go to work. I felt anxious. My body felt off going into work. And our work, let's be real, we sometimes spend more time with our work colleagues than we do with our loved ones. It's just the reality of the culture we lived in. Thank you for responding to these polls, because it's so easy to fall into these patterns, and also to acknowledge that you are not your protective pattern. It is a pattern that you have. It is not something that you are beholden to. It's something that does serve you at times. There are times that we should avoid. It is the healthy thing to do.
And I will say all of these I've used in the workplace. Sometimes they were helpful and sometimes they weren't. And the part of the We Are Resilient approach, I think one of the most important parts is to understand if it's helpful and when it's not being helpful. So I'm just going to share the results of our poll.
I just clicked the button, Mary. Sorry, I saw it and I clicked it.
Good. Good, good. The results of our poll, right? So we have distrust. We have somebody who's people who are doing all 6 of our protective patterns, right? And exactly. I've done them all at work. The whole point of the protective patterns is just to start recognizing, am I doing this? What kind of responsibility do I have for the challenging workplace relationships that I'm encountering? Right? Is my protective pattern being helpful in that relationship? Is it not being helpful? As we showed in the beginning, we believe in practicing the We Are Resilient approach and modeling, and then maybe coaching others to do it. So first we have to acknowledge what's happening for ourselves, and noticing our protective patterns is really important part of doing that. If you have any questions or comments about protective patterns, we'd love to hear them in the chat or the Q&A. We're welcome to any of that as we move forward.
And one of the things that we say, and I think is so important that our executive director, Dr. Charles Fisher, gave us, is this idea that every human being has impeccable reasons for being exactly who they are. And when we talk about our protective patterns, we can, in fact, for me, in my household, even with my children, we now use it as a part of our language with one another. So if I'm feeling myself losing my cool, I can say to my family, hey, attacking is coming out and I need to take a moment. I need to take a break. And they don't hear that as an attack. They hear that as like a, oh, warning zone. Mom needs 5 minutes to calm down. So I encourage, as we explore this with others into their workplace, if it becomes a common language, it can become something where I can share what I need, my children can share what they need, and I understand they have impeccable reasons for being who they are. Mary, I want to name that we're about to jump into our collaborating skills. We're coming up on our 30-minute mark. I hope everyone can stay with us. We might go over that 30-minute mark because I think it's super valuable. If you can't, we understand, you'll get the recording afterwards. But just to name that, because our collaborating skills are so important, and anyone doing a presentation knows it's a balance in what we present and how long. So Mary, collaborating.
So our collaborating skills. So there's 3 skills that we're going to talk about today. We just feel like they're really important and can really help with a challenging workplace, right? And the first one we're going to talk about is appreciating others. And that is communicate what you appreciate. This is something we probably all know. And if you're like me and like most people I know, it's easy to forget how important appreciation is, right? What kind of lube it is in the workplace. Oops, wow, I just really did something there. Sorry.
You
about
just jumped right ahead. It's okay,
So,
we're resilient.
Communicate what you appreciate. So just to think about, when did you last give someone words of appreciation to someone at work? How did it impact them? And how did it impact you? One of the things about all these skills, it's amazing. When we give words of appreciation, we feel better. So thinking about how you can do that for others. Research shows that when we're sharing positive emotions on a regular basis, groups have more cooperation and less conflict, employee engagement goes up, all sorts of positive things. So the more you can do to bring appreciation into your workplace, even if you're not a manager, if you're, someone, just a worker in the workplace, you start appreciating others, people can start creating the habit. You can also share ways like bulletin boards. We're going to put words of appreciation. They're little things that you can do to take leadership roles, even if you're not officially in a manager position, to really improve appreciation. And then,
sorry, go ahead, Mary. I was going to mention, make sure we talk about appreciating differences. Are you going to speak to that?
Yes. Can you find one thing to appreciate about the person you find challenging and share it with them? I know when I first came to Dovetail, there were people who had completely different work styles than I did. And I was like, wow, what am I going to do with that? That person never does things the way that I want them to do. We have one person who just talks randomly about things all the time. And it wasn't until I learned to appreciate his differences and what he was bringing to the team and saw, wow, that was just the way that he was operating. I'm very sequential. He's random, but he brings so many other gifts that by appreciating it, that I was able to say, wow, okay, together we make the team.
And Mary, I just think it's so funny because when it comes down to spreadsheets, Mary and I are very different when it comes to data validation. I don't know how many spreadsheet, Excel, or Google Sheet users are on this list, but for me, if I do data validation, it's from a list. And if Mary does data validation, it's from a range. And every time I go into one of Mary's spreadsheets, I go, oh, how do I adjust? Oh, yeah, Mary does it this way. I do it this way. And the same thing is said when Mary goes into my spreadsheet. So acknowledging that we can appreciate the differences, even if they are differences, even at that silly, minute level. It's so important.
And then the more you can send around appreciations and share them regularly, I mean, if there's somebody who's bothering you, just kill that person with kindness. The more you can lean into that, you'll notice you're feeling differently about them, they're feeling different in your relationship. So that's just, it seems funny, and it's like, well, how can I appreciate them when they're X, Y, and Z? And it's just something that we invite you to try. Use your curiosity mindset and see how appreciation can make a difference.
And our next collaborating skill, and there are 5 in total. We're only covering 3 today because we want to just give you that bite-sized amount, but we're talking about seeking agreements. Just in the chat, just go ahead and share. How many of us have explicitly sought agreements with our colleagues to the point that we know exactly who does what and who does not do what and what that looks like, and everyone knows whose role is what? I know that in many workplace situations, we jump to what we'll talk about next, honoring agreements, before we start by explicitly naming agreements together and seeking them. We chose the word seeking because it's collaborative, it's generative. How do we work together? So our tagline for this is same page, same chapter, same book. I've been in organizations in which I'm on the same chapter, but everyone has a different book. So it doesn't really matter if everyone's on chapter 2 if you're not in the same book. And so it's really important in a supervisory role. I've been guilty of this, of not seeking agreements before I decide to honor them. And assumptions can be some of our biggest obstacles. So if we move into our seeking agreements, think about a recent conflict or group effort that didn't go well. What implicit assumptions got in the way because you didn't have agreements? Who here has had that experience? I know myself, whether it's in my family dynamic or my work dynamic or even in a classroom dynamic, it doesn't matter the dynamic. There's so many times that I assume, Mary, I assume you're going to have the spreadsheet with my data validation and a list done on Tuesday. And if I didn't check in and create that in advance, even if it's on my agenda, it may not be on another person's agenda. And it seems so simple.
We can talk about another conflict we had at work, and that is the conflict around interrupting, right?
Yeah.
Christy and I like to talk on top of each other, and we're just totally fine. We're generative with that, and it feels good, right?
Yeah.
And one of our colleagues really had trouble with it. Actually, a couple of our colleagues, and it felt rude to them. It felt really difficult. We didn't have an agreement about how we're going to be together. We had an agreement about what we were going to do, but not how we were going to do it, how we were going to have these meetings in which we brainstormed ideas.
And to acknowledge the different learning abilities. So when I speak is how I think, and for others, when they listen is how they think. And so even acknowledging what Mary's talking about is so important. I just cut Mary off. Mary, did I offend you?
Not at all.
No.
Yeah, so it's just a type of example of the more that you can seek agreements with other people and really explicit both what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and also how you're going to do it. Yeah.
So important as a team. And it's something often in organizations that's overlooked. And we often jump to honoring agreements, right, Mary? We start expecting people to engage in the same way we engage, or we expect people to turn assignments in or projects in or whatever is due without ever sharing what is on your plate, working against a deadline. But other people on a project may not know that. It's so easy to overlook that component. And when we talk about that, it's about honoring your word, right? There's 2 big ways to honor a word. Okay, keeping it. If I'm going to give you a spreadsheet on Tuesday, Mary, I got to give you a spreadsheet on Tuesday. And if I can't give you the spreadsheet on Tuesday, it is on my shoulders not to let my protective pattern come up because I'm feeling maybe some shame and judgment that I can't keep my word, which is so easy to do. We have a relationship where we've agreed, we sought the agreements, that if you can't make a deadline, this is how we handle it. I can go and say, sorry, Mary, the spreadsheet's not done. I think I can have it done by Thursday, realistically. And we can be engaged around that, as opposed to feeling, I don't know about anyone else, but I feel shame and judgment if I say I'm going to do something and I can't get there. And as soon as shame and judgment happens, safety feels activated. And then my protective pattern might pop out. Maybe I get snippy with someone and the attacking comes out. Or maybe I get avoiding and I just hide for a little while in my office until I, eventually fess up. So just being aware that our protective patterns are in this colleague to colleague relationships, in our group resilience, how that can present. Anything for you, Mary, that you would share?
Well, just in terms of honoring agreements, I mean, all the time we have to like renegotiate, right? Sort of renegotiate.
Yeah.
That this was going to happen, this isn't going to happen, and it's one of the things about that is the more you do it, the easier it is to do. Like, okay, we tried for this and it didn't work, and when you don't have that expectation, when you don't have that experience, it's harder to do. So I will just say, start doing it, try a little bit, and work your way through it. I will also say, again, I know that sometimes it's like, well, other people aren't doing this. Why should I try to do this, right? I'm just working in this workplace that doesn't follow any of these agreements. So how can I do it? And part of it is just starting with, you can say to your boss, can we have some agreements on this, right? You can say it to your colleagues, can we seek some agreements? Like, try it with the places where you might be able to have some success and build out there, right?
Thank you for acknowledging that, because depending on where you are in the organization can depend on whether or not you can implement systemic change or system changes. We get that question a lot, but you can acknowledge what you actually have the power to make your workday better, your colleagues' workday better, no matter the role in which you're entering the stream.
So, of course, honoring agreements, the research shows that groups perform better when they confront each other, if they break norms, like if we've all decided to do X and we aren't doing it, right? And we also know it's difficult because of the power imbalance that can happen in the workplace. So again, start where you can. That's why we have the practice model coach, and then see how it can go out.
And the micro habits, you don't have to jump in and do some huge practice, but it's something that you can do simply. So if someone has not kept an agreement, be curious. Don't get big. Practice, practice, practice not getting big and saying, hey, Mary, I noticed that you didn't turn something in at a time that I thought you were going to. Is something going on? Can I support you? What needs to happen? The phrase that I learned from you, Mary, that I feel is so important is, how can I support you? Or can I support you? When we're in a supervisory role, when I first had the people under me in a workplace situation in the org chart, I use air quotes because everyone does a great job to make an organization function. I had a lot of expectations, and it was hard for me to see how I should be supporting others. What is my role in this relationship? So again, practice, practice, practice comes back to me. And then also let others know how you were impacted when an agreement was not met, but doing so through kindness, not letting our protective patterns go off. We'll have an entire session on centering skills, but to be centered when you interact with a colleague. Thank you for letting me know that won't be done until Thursday. Since I don't have it yet, I won't be able to include it in my report, just so you know that impacted me without some sort of repercussion. And then to check in regularly to build accountability. Sometimes we assume that other people are going to respond to us in a way that we haven't shared. Again, it's seeking the agreement. So it's important to do those check-ins on a regular basis and to do so again from curiosity and kindness.
And as a supervisor, if somebody is not doing what I hope that they should do, I always assume that I have not done the seeking agreements part correctly, right? Because I think most people want to do a good job. Most people are trying to do a good job, and they're not doing a good job. Go back to seeking agreements and figuring out, okay, what is the agreement so that we're all on the same page, right? And if you're really sure you have that agreement and they haven't done it, then move into like checking in regularly. What kind of communication can you have? For me, the people who work under me are only as good as the communication I give to them. And if they're not doing their work, I assume it's on me. And that's how we can get the practice model coach out there. So one thing we want to end on is just to understand that, like I said, we have these resilient skills and sometimes we use them well and sometimes we don't. And it's helpful to communicate with colleagues. That's part of honoring agreements. So sometimes we just say, I'm not my most resilient self at this moment. And we let people know, like if it's stuff at home, stuff at work, so people understand, like my protective patterns might come up in a way that I hope they don't, but so you know in advance. And thinking about what pattern can I honor or resilient skill can I choose right now? So if I'm feeling really off, what of the other many skills that we have can we use? What of our centering skills? So as we talked about, we have a lot of other things to talk about the We Are Resilient approach. I have a circle that I'm starting on May 2nd, 5 p.m. West Coast time, 8 p.m. East Coast time. I'd love to have any of you join. It's free. It's a 6-week circle, 1 hour a week, and it has a lot of interaction and allows you to integrate the material in. And if that doesn't work for you, there's a lot of other webinars and other circles that will be coming up on our website. So just go to dovetaillearning.org. We have a lot of books. We have Practical Skills for a More Resilient Family, which is just a small book that can help you guide you through the approach. And if you want to take it deeper into your family, we have over 80 family activities that give you a lot of things to do with your kids that could help you with this approach. Visit dovetaillearning.org to see all of our free digital resources, and there's a lot to join our circle, training, or webinar, or purchase materials. And if you want more info, you can contact info@dovetaillearning.org, Mary at dovetaillearning.org. Oh, I forgot to ask if there's any questions.
I was just going to say, Mary, I think there's a couple questions I see queued up, so I want to make sure that we address them. I know I'm so grateful for all of you who've stayed with us over our time limit. One of the questions that I see is, I am not in a supervisory role, and I'm seeing a supervisor that is not engaging in a helpful way with other people in our workplace. I know you touched on some of these things, or we've touched on some of these things. Any thoughts on any direct advice that you might give someone who is seeing and noticing an unhelpful supervisor?
That's super challenging, and we see it all the time, right? So part of it obviously depends on your relationships in the organization, which is why we started with build those relationships, right? You can have a relationship directly with the person who's being affected and maybe able to have a conversation with them about whether they can have a conversation with their boss. You can have a conversation with the boss if you feel like the power dynamic might work. You can suggest that everybody on your team look at the We Are Resilient approach and maybe kind of do some self-study or join a circle or have us come in and do some training for We Are Resilient. Happy to do any of that. So it sort of depends on your entry point into the organization.
And I think also to touch on that, what we've experienced when someone practices and models just within their organization, it kind of spreads to other people. So if you can acknowledge a negative impact that one colleague or one supervisor is having on an entire department, and instead of being directive about it, practicing all of the resilient skills yourself, modeling it for those around you, people start to realize that there is a little bit of a lifeline to make it better. It's not going to fix any of those problems, but it can create a little bit of a better situation to be a little bit more centered, and maybe to start to understand, why is that supervisor acting in that way? Maybe being curious, why is there protective pattern coming out? Why is this person attacking me all the time? Maybe they're not feeling safe. We don't know what's going on with anyone else's story. One last question that I do see is, I am a supervisor or someone coming in from a supervisor role, and they're curious about how do they bring this to a team if they're maybe not ready for it?
How do you bring it to a team if you're not ready for it? Well, first, as everything, we always start centered ourselves, right? So you start yourself, and then you start modeling for it. You start talking about it. Maybe you're not going to bring it to the team, but you're showing materials. You might want to put the poster up, and you might have the books around, and you use the language. The more you can use the language yourself, the easier, and you're kind of prepping the team and getting the team ready. So that's kind of what I would suggest. We have a couple comments. I got a group of coworkers to file a complaint with the EDD, with hostile working environment. Yeah, there's always the approach for sure. The California Department of Fair Housing and Employment is another option. Yes, when things are really bad, that's absolutely. And I think that's what gets back to what we were talking about before. We're just talking about the preventative, so we can prevent things from getting worse. But when it's really hostile, then you need to go and maybe seek
intervention. Yes. And one thing to name too, if you are a supervisor wanting to bring this idea to a group of your organization, is I believe an invitation approach. Mary was saying plant the seeds, sprinkle the seeds. I recommend them people doing like introductory, like an hour-long intro into the We Are Resilient approach, and then offering more if people want it. You can lead a horse to water, as we know, but they may not drink. So it's important to make it invitational and not mandated. Um, you can't mandate someone to choose to practice resilient skills. It just isn't going to happen. That's not how we are as people, but you can plant a seed and you can do invitation.
I want to thank you all for joining us today, and we hope you learned something that might be useful in your workplace. We're always open for feedback. If you want to send feedback directly to me at mary@dovetaillearning.org, we love to hear from you. And as I said, you will be getting an email with the slides and the recording from today. Hopefully it'll be helpful for you and those that around you. Take care. And
thank you so much.